Hey, welcome to the 37th meeting of the Going Through Pages Rock and Roll Book Club, where we do booze, books, and bickering. And this is a special Going Through Pages Rock and Roll Book Club. It's the first one that's all online, and it's the first one that's not directly a rock and roll book. But I like the idea of reading a book that's of the spirit of rock and roll, and I think you guys would agree
Rock and roll.
that this is a fairly rock and roll in spirit book, even though it takes place mostly in the teens and 20s thus
Right.
far. And yeah, we've been reading a book by Frank Harris, who's actually was an editor and a writer and a bit of a busybody scene guy. But he's most famous for this book, which is his memoir, which is My Life and Loves. Okay, and I think that's an appropriate title. And the book was banned for many decades. It couldn't find publishing. It was passed around. There were copies that were handed about that were expensive, but now it's in the public domain and it's available and around. And we read the first 8 chapters of it through chapter 1 through 8. And for the Going Through Pages Rock and Roll Book Club, there's only four of us here. Let's keep it kind of open, but we generally have 7 categories. And we'll just use that as kind of a framework. I have notes for it, but even if you didn't prepare anything, let's just talk about it. Sound good, guys?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good to you. So, the first category is a very simple one, general vibes, and it's your overall feelings about the reading selection. What were your just first impressions? What comes to you when you think about that? So let me ask you, who wants to say something? Who's got general vibes about this so far? Good or bad, indifferent, whatever.
You
Yeah.
know, I liked it a lot actually because I sort of expected it to be perhaps, like just sort of banal or trashy. Like I remember maybe about 6 months ago, I came across this one guy who was writing a blog about how he gets laid in Shanghai. And I'm all like, all right, whatever, and it's always about, hey, I go out and I got a girl and I took her back to my place and she thought I was an amazing coxman and she complimented me on the size of my sword. And I was like, sounds like bullshit. Plus, he's not giving me anything interesting and the writing wasn't any good, you know. But this book, to me, he's kind of an intellectual.
Yeah,
He appreciates ideas, I mean, and so he's certain times going to schools and you get a little bit of that English schoolboy drama, and but he's also hooking up with various types of intellectual types. I guess later he's going to hang out with Oscar Wilde, or whatever. So, plus the introduction, he states his claim as to why he's going to be Frank. He fucking changed his name to Frank. He wasn't even born Frank, but he's all like, I'm going to have to be Frank. And so, all right, and he's fairly intellectual enough that the writing isn't poetically, anything fantastic, but at the same time, it's at least literate.
it's
He
quality. Yeah,
manages to capture situations and people, and he keeps it moving along. It never drags down. It's not like he's necessarily just conceited and trying to paint a picture for you of how great he is, but he
mm,
goes through all kinds of pretty interesting adventures, you
yeah.
know. And so wherever he goes, he gets into the mix and meets interesting people and manages to make a fortune, and so it's pretty a compelling coming of age type of story. And I was like, yeah, this is a fun read.
Yeah, like chapter 8 ends with him finishing his days, at least a first run. If there might be more, I don't know. Wrestling with cowboys and stealing cattle and stuff. So it's not like he's the world's greatest cattleman, and he did it for that long. but it's pretty interesting for what he did, and just like
Yeah.
all the bits, I feel like they're adding up to an interesting collage of stories in this sort of memoir format. And he says, "Look, I'm in my late 60s. Might as well get all the dirt out." He's an atheist; he doesn't care anyway. So yeah. What, Julia? What are your impressions so far?
Enjoyed a lot. And yes, it is just like a bunch of random stories that are pretty awesome, actually. And he does talk himself up quite a bit with
Yeah,
the
I
intelligence
thought
part.
he does, but I think it's almost natural. But yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely
yeah,
think there's more of
yeah.
that than you let on, Kevin. But yeah,
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think it's bullshit that anybody could just read like a whole book and then suddenly be able to quote the whole fucking thing.
And
It's
also
like,
like
well, that's one of the
just
claims though. That is, but wait, that's one of the
he's
claims
also
though that I have some
remembering
issues with, where he
complete
talks about how he's
conversation.
able to read a thing once and then memorize it. Like that's fucking ridiculous. But anyway, I'm sorry. What were you saying,
That's
Julia?
insane.
Well, maybe I don't know. What were you, what else? Any other first impressions, Julia?
Not right now.
Okay, that's fine. Jack, do you have anything you want to add to that? Just in terms of general impressions.
Yeah, yeah, like I definitely right away just like question all of it at some level. Like, is this dude like, like, is he? How much is this real? Also, he's older and he's like a bit ill at the time, and like, and so like, how these? I know he's got an amazing memory and all, but like, is he really recounting every detail in this story? Like, you
Exactly.
know,
Like
Well, it
conversations and stuff. Uh
that's an
right?
interesting thing. I mean, it's an interesting thing to emphasize than his memory because he talks about his memory a lot and memorizing things. I wonder either A, maybe he's telling you how he's being able to do it, or B, he's setting up his own defense for any questions about it as well. It depends on
Right.
how tricky you really think he is. It's tough to say, but I
uh
mean, he definitely addresses it. It's not like he just. It's just you have to assume he's going past it, right?
but I don't know. At the beginning it seems like he's like, I'm not gonna defend myself, whatever, here's what happened. And then
Right.
he's defending himself. Uh
Well, I mean, it seems like, especially in his schoolboy days, his memory seems to have been an important aspect of it. You know,
Right.
so I mean, maybe he was, and he was a writer, editor guy, so he knows how to craft things and stuff. It is there's a romance to it, emphasis on the romance stuff. Um,
Yeah.
and so uh, like he mentions the girl's full ass, and there's some of the sex details we'll get into a bit. But like, I mean, he jumps around to some interesting bits. Being an immigrant to America is very much a Titanic sort of thing of just getting on the boat as a teenager and coming. And then the Great Chicago Fire, I had no idea that was coming. That was an interesting bit as well. And he already mentions Walt Whitman, and I think we're gonna get some Oscar Wilde and some other guys as well.
Right. I feel cause yeah, like I feel like the whole one of the other like kind of main themes that I feel like comes out a lot with him is like his ability to control himself. Like his next level self control of like and controlling things around him in a lot of ways that are like how much like he's just like this like machine, and he's just like
well,
no, if I just do this if I want to do this, and
that's how you
I'll
do
never.
well when you
I'm
try to
done
do the
abusing
high jump.
myself. Like,
You can't be whacking off the night before you do the high jump. You're not going to be able to jump as high. That's the secret, right? That's the secret.
you see, I thought that would help. I don't know.
Well,
No, no, he's right.
right.
He's right. Um, let's
but
move
yeah,
on to our second category, which is spells good to me, which is well written sentences and passages. So I have five of them here that I wanted to highlight, and we could use them as a jumping point to talk about more of it as well. And if you have any notes or anything written related, we can add those in as well. So um, from page one, and this talks about a little bit about his. He gives his sort of um, modus operandi, his sort of purpose. So I record the shameful fact for the benefit of those rebels and lovers of the ideal who will surely find themselves in a similar plight in future emergencies. So he's kind of putting out a guide for rebels and lovers, and rebels and lovers with a capital R and a capital L. So, and I think rebellion and love are that's what he's talking about, right?
Right. Well, right, because also in that forward he talks about the religious aspect of how
Yeah.
he's so sick of the Puritanism, and he's kind of like this, and so it's like I'm rebelling against not just like an aimless thing. Like he's rebelling against this specific whole ideology of religion that he's seen so much of, from his time in Ireland. He talks about it a bit, I think, and then like in America, he talks about the American Puritanism, like in that
Yeah.
forward, and so like very much that's where I feel like a lot of his rebellion comes from.
Those are okay, so I had those written up in another section, but we can talk about them right now because the section number 3 is hot takes or well thought out arguments or assertions from the author, and other tantalizing tidbits. But let's talk about that now since you brought it up, and there's only 4 of us anyway, right? So he talks about Puritanism from 2 different perspectives a lot in the book. One is through religion, and one is through nationalism. And the religious aspects, he's pretty clear about. But the nationalistic aspect, he kind of goes back and forth because he seems to have, in a way, a very nationalistic tinge to what he is, but then he also pushes back against it in a little bit. Let's talk about the religious aspect more. So I have a couple quotes related to that, and we can talk about what he thinks about Christianity. He really divides the Bible into the Jesus bits, which is the hippie stuff, and love thy neighbor, all that stuff, and the Paul stuff, which is, the gospel,
Right.
which is those ideals. So here's some quotes related to it. The silly sex morality of Paul has brought discredit upon the whole gospel. I often said, another quote, I often say that the Christian churches were offered 2 things, the spirit of Jesus and the idiotic morality of Paul, as they all rejected the highest aspirations and took their hearts the incredible base and stupid prohibition. 2 more. Paul and the Christian churches have dirty desire, degraded women, debased procreation, vulgarized and vilified the best instinct in us. The best instinct? Oh, okay. And then one more that kind of brings it around when he's in his schoolboy years. For weeks before, I've been reading the Bible for the most incredible stories in it and the smut, which I retailed all night to the delight of the boys in the big bedroom. So he kind of sets up the dichotomy of the Bible between the sexy, fun Jesus stuff and this boring, meanie Paul who just hates all pleasure. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I like him. He's sex positive. He's one of those sex positive guys. And he sort of makes this claim that, hey, listen, so many biographies skip the sexual aspect of someone's life, even though it's such a big motivating factor, maybe kind of in a libido kind of a way. And maybe at that time it was fairly true that you wouldn't get a truly honest, upfront confession of the type of erotic life that motivates human beings. So he does overstate his case in some ways, but at the same time, at least he's trying to cut to the truth of things in a way that I was like, all right, I could have a beer with this guy and probably vibe with him.
Yeah,
He's a little sexist and he's a little racist here and there, but at the
yeah.
same time, you know, he's not an asshole, really. He's just
Well, well, let me say, was the Marquis de Sade translated into English and available at this time? I don't like the answer is I don't know.
not sure.
So because that
Possibly, I
also
mean,
has
but
some very sexual, crazy stuff then from a little earlier. But yeah, I mean, he's definitely. I read the New Testament. I didn't get that sort. I mean, I understand what he's saying in terms of Paul in the in the New Testament, Paul kind of laying out the more ceremonial aspects of things and Jesus being, but I didn't get the sort of dichotomy he talks about in the book in that aspect. They seem to be hand in hand with each other. So I had never heard that sort of dichotomatic dichotomy aspect of the New Testament. So I don't know.
And right, like another quote that like kind of reminds me of the from page 16, where because he says he's talking about like writing and how it's kind of not done correctly, and he says we're compelled to pad out with murder, theft, and arson, which, as everybody knows, are perfectly moral things to write about. But like he talks about, like sex. No, 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 you can't talk about this. Like, but we fill it out with murder and arson and theft, and
That's a
don't
good
worry about
point.
that.
Yeah. And by the way, there is arson. There's the Great Chicago Fire. Maybe not arson, but there's a fire, and there is
Right.
stealing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He pads it out a little bit. That's all.
I mean, there's stealing cattle. There's the biggest fire. There's death by
That's right.
syphilis. So yeah.
Right.
All right. Here's another quote. I just love this. This is more a term. I never heard this term before, but it's from page 17. It was Cecil Howard who first initiated strange rays in me into self-abuse. I had never
Yeah.
heard the term self-abuse for
I've heard of
masturbation.
that before. I
I'd never
have.
heard of. I need to
It
start using
still trips me
self-abuse.
out. It still trips me out. And
Right.
why not? Call it self-abuse. It's fun.
Right. It took me at least like 2 or 3 times reading that to like kind of be like, oh, that okay, I get it. I was like, like at first I was like, what is he doing to himself? Like, I get like,
Well, Jack, let me tell you about the
is he,
birds and the
is
bees
he
a
like
bit.
stabbing
I think
himself or
that
like?
Well,
I
there's
think
also
that'd
there's
be
also
a
the
complete
fagging, the
religious
bug.
view
Yeah,
of it, though. That would just be a religious view of it, I feel.
Yeah, I think that
Right.
really does reflect the
That's
fact that
true.
the kind of teaching about religion in the Bible that he would have been getting in all these schools is that type of Paul shit that he's all like, I don't buy it because as soon as I got my rocks off a couple of times, I'm like, what's wrong with this?
yeah,
You know, but
yeah,
what really surprised me a lot was when he gets to that English school, and there's a lot of the bullying stuff, which I know is very famous for some of those English boarding schools and the atmosphere. But then there's all this kind of like jailhouse forced homosexuality on everybody, and I was
yeah.
like, "What?
Right.
Really? Is that what they were doing?" And then it didn't even seem like they were necessarily gay. It just seemed like, well,
Right.
that's what everybody does. They all force bully you into giving them hand jobs every night and stuff. And I'm like, wait, what? Really?
I
Right.
mean, yeah, that was certainly a big part of the first half. The sort of the buggering and all what is it, fagging, like all,
Yeah.
and that those terms it took me a bit to figure out as well. And I did some research on those as well. Um, yeah, like yeah, all I
First
mean,
first
I but
hand research.
the it's an interesting situation because I guess obviously you have stories of those sort of things in Catholic schools and stuff, but I would imagine that if you have the fathers, the adults who are at the school, if they are there for long terms and there's no consequence and they're passing it down to the students, you probably get a a hand job me down sort of system that kind of develops after a while. Obviously the whole thing is very abusive in a way, but you know,
Right.
sure.
You mean like the
Um,
father going, "Oh yeah, that happened to me too. Whatever, you'll get over it."
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, and stuff. Like, yeah, that was like that was like more than
Intense.
a chapter, right? Like, was
It was a lot.
just that. There's like 2 chapters of just that, like pretty much. Like,
Well,
Yeah.
and that therefore thereafter he becomes an atheist, and he was I mean, if you were to play psychologist, if you were to play Freud from this, you would say, well, he has these traumatic childhood sexual experiences that were intense and probably blocked for a while at least. And
Right.
then this was they probably how he developed later on his sort of personality and stuff. And from this is how I came across him. Is I came across this book from another book which talks about meeting Frank Harris, and we'll get to that. Actually, why not? I'll bring that up now. So the last book we kind of did for the Rock and Roll Book Club is by Paul Robeson, the who's a folk singer and an activist and an interesting guy. And I'll bring that up right now. Do, 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 do. So this is from the book Paul Robeson, a biography. It said, while on the Riviera, the Robesons also met Frank Harris. Frank Harris, the Irish American writer whose erotic autobiography, My Life in Loves, was currently 1922-1927 appearing in 4 volumes in Germany, and who lived in Simez, just outside of Nice. So they're in France at the time. Emma Goldman, who's another interesting figure, read Emma, who's one of the first famous anarchists, was a good friend of Harris's. She had helped to promote his book, The Bomb, about the Haymarket anarchists. There you go. And had asked him to get in touch with the Robesons after they arrived in the south of France. Here we go. So this is a quote from Paul Robeson's wife, Essie, right? He is a nice old man, Essie wrote in her diary, with the filthiest mouth I ever heard, always talking about your behind in pleasure and breast and filth. He talked dirt all the time till finally we were bored stiff. I think stiff is a good word there. Harris accompanied them when they went to visit the Jamaican writer Claude McKay and the radical journalist Max Eastman. So I read that in a book, and I was like, I got to read this guy's shit.
Right. Yeah,
Uh,
I feel like though, like I feel like that is it makes a big impact in the beginning when he's talking about all the sex and stuff, but then it's gone. Like basically, like at some point, once he decides that he's not doing self abuse and he's gonna make some of himself and he's gonna have self control over everything. Like there really isn't any more talk of sex like for probably a few chapters or something. It kind of
yeah,
like, which I think is also as a writer that's clever because like they're saying like in this conversation, if you're sitting with someone and all they're talking about is like sex and trying to be the biggest pervert in the room, like eventually you just get bored and desensitized. But like
yeah,
in the book, it's like it hits you real hard with that for a bit, and then it's kind of like, all right, but now we're gonna talk about fires and yeah, the cattle rustling and cow punching and all this crazy shit, And you're like, oh
yeah.
yeah, okay. I feel like it makes it more unbelievable because like I feel like how could this one guy be doing all this stuff? I don't know. Like I don't know where this is like recorded other than in this book. I don't know how much of it is verifiable, but like I still just question some of
Well,
the detail.
but we do know he's going to be hanging out with people like Walt Whitman, right? And Walt Whitman was, a homosexual guy, and he got around a lot. And some of the other characters, I feel like it's going to be making a comeback. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
not just a sex autobiography. It's an
Right.
autobiography with a lot of sex.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Say a
was
lot,
surprised.
but okay.
Oh wait, go ahead.
What did you
um,
say, Julia? Okay. What did you say, Kevin?
I said I wouldn't say a lot. I disagree with that.
Especially for the time, and the details of it. Yeah,
Yeah,
Kevin.
I mean, in the book, he never really seems to analyze much. Um, he never says something like, "Well, we can see that this forced sexual activity is a way that's more about power than it is pleasure, probably, right? It's almost like humility. I mean, there's that one kid who winds up bleeding, and then
Yeah,
they have to call the teacher, and the teacher's all like, "Well, now it's gone a little too far. We usually let this go." It's obviously rape, basically, and
Right.
there'd be nothing wrong, I suppose, if there was just some homosexual guys at school and they like to get off with each other and let them. That's fine, but the way it's portrayed is he never happens to say anything like, and I thought this was outrageous or objectionable. it's
Yeah.
true that they just sort of like, well, and that's what those boys did.
He
You know,
doesn't.
he does
He
get in a
stays in the
fight.
moment. The voice of the book is in the moment. He doesn't
Yeah,
reflect on things in terms of the style of the book. You know what I'm
yeah,
saying? There's a tiny bit of that, but not so much. Like for example, like back to the quotes. Like he'll say things like from page 51, no moral lesson I have received before or since compare with that given me by that first night in a theater. So that does give a reflective attitude in a way. You know what I'm saying? Because he's saying no day before or after.
Right. Right. I feel like I sense reflection when he's talking about how fucking amazing he is. And he's like, and then I did this thing, and everybody stood up and clapped, and it was like, and I felt so good and so proud, and it's like that's like he does that a lot, where he starts being like, it was amazing, and everybody said it was amazing, like,
Well, let's be a little bit fair. So we're talking about him as a youth, and it's not written as like an historical book. It's written as a memoir, and especially if you're 12, 13, 14, 15, those are the things that are going to impact you the most, right?
right,
You know what I'm saying?
right,
So,
right.
but
Right. I'm
when
not. I'm not judging it. I'm just saying it seems like that happens often in the book. Like,
yeah, yeah. And
yeah.
if he's hanging out with Oscar Wilde and Paul Robeson and those guys, he did have some success for sure.
Right.
Two more quotes here, and then we'll get to the hot take. So, um, like these next two ones, I just thought were really well written passages. So, from page 59, one evening, landlights flickering in the distance drew crowds to the deck. The ship began to slow down. The cabin passengers went down below as usual, but hundreds of immigrants sat up as I did and watched the stars slide down the sky till at length dawn came with silver lights and startling revelations. Really well written, and it's an interesting metaphor for an immigrant, an expat, a guy who traveled as well. All of the poor people, all the people excited to travel, the immigrants sat up and looked at the stars, but everyone else went below the deck.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't catch that.
And one more that I liked a lot from page 65: our warm bodies lay together, a thousand hot pulses beating in us. I thought that was well written. You know,
Yeah.
he's definitely he's not a shabby writer. All right. Next, category number 3, steaming hot takes, well thought out arguments and assertions from the author, and other tantalizing tidbits. Here's one that he brings up that I thought was interesting, kind of reflection and analysis on literature. He says, there are two main traditions of English writing: the one of perfect liberty, that of Chaucer and Shakespeare, completely outspoken with a certain liking for lascivious details and witty smut, a man's speech. The other, emasculated more and more by Puritanism and since the French Revolution, gelded to tameness proprietary. For that upheaval brought the illiterate middle class to power and ensured the domination of girl readers. Little sexist there, a little interesting thing. But what's interesting is that he talks about Chaucer and Shakespeare as being necessarily masculine. You know what I'm saying? That's not, and I get that from Chaucer, a bit, but I also is all of Shakespeare very masculine in nature? I don't think all of it. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I never thought it was masculine at all, but that's me.
Well, like Julius Caesar is very masculine, but there's also Romeo and Juliet. You know what I'm saying? You could see Richard III being very masculine, but there's also lots of the one in the forest with the forest wood
Midsummer's
nymphs
Night
and shit.
Dream.
So, A Midsummer's Night's Dream.
Midsummer Nights.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't find that to be necessarily masculine. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think maybe one of the things he means is that by masculine, he probably means open to discussing things or making certain jokes or observations about human nature that are bold. I mean, like take Romeo and Juliet. The very first scene of Romeo and Juliet are these two guys talking, and they basically say, "Hey, listen, you got a dick that smells like fish." And the guy's all like, "Hey, well, fuck you. I can use this the way it's intended to. If I have to, and I meet one of those Capulets, I'll be able to rape the women and kill the men." And so obviously I don't think Shakespeare admires these guys. He sets them up as a model of kind of these assholes who have, you know, have this toxic masculinity kind of thing. I mean, I think that's one of the things that Shakespeare really does well is he's got a very humanist point of view about human nature, but there's a lot of jokes throughout
Yeah,
Romeo and Juliet where they're making sex jokes basically.
exactly.
So in
There's
other
sex
words,
jokes in
I
a lot of
think
Shakespeare, for sure.
he doesn't shy away, whereas maybe he thinks some of these other writers he would characterize as more feminine, which is probably the perception that women are supposed to be, reserved and
Mhm.
careful in their talk, and they're supposed to be, classically showing good manners, whereas men can be a little rough and talk rude,
But see, but
so
see,
maybe he means it that way.
but see, like he associates masculinity. So he says like femininity brings a sort of lower class reader, a more feminine poor reader. But like what you just said, with a rougher, you associate masculinity to me. I think he associates masculinity with being like upper class or higher class and stuff, not necessarily rougher. Like his sort of ideal of masculine, it seems, is not being rough and tumble and a working man, but being more of an aristocrat. You know what I'm saying? Which is just a very different change in an idea of masculinity. When I think
That
of
is,
masculine, I think of like a football player working at the coal mine, digging deep. His idea of masculine is a lord. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, that is definitely true. It's that English uh, class perception that really often is like the English gentleman is
Right.
definitely a
He
kind of a
says,
thing where I think that's definitely reflected there.
yeah,
Yeah.
what is that bit where he goes on about gentlemen? And like, well, I'm trying to remember now what that is, but I remember there's like the section where he starts talking about like, oh, this is the problem with gentlemen. They're like this, or maybe that's even in the forward somewhere. I can't remember. But
I'll
he does
try to
he
find
does
it real
it.
quick.
It is a bit similar to that idea of like what he's masculine, feminine, and I guess like looking at what he's announced in the forward as being kind of the dichotomies that we're going to be looking at. Like in some ways, maybe like feminine is Puritan and masculine is Shakespeare, and like he's trying to force it a little bit. Maybe it's not quite
Yeah.
there, but he's trying to set you up, to
Yeah.
do that.
And he says Shakespeare's masculine. Anyway, that's just one.
Right.
So here's more about his view of Western culture and religion and how they're tied. And it's a bit confused a bit to me, but maybe you guys have a different opinion. Here's three different quotes, three different parts. So the greatest crimes in recorded the greatest crimes in recorded time have been committed during the last half century almost without protest by the most civilized nations that still call themselves Christian. Okay. So just hold right there. Last 50 years, the worst crimes. Here's the next quote. I've described the whole incident for it illustrates to me the English desire to be fair. It is really a guided impulse in them on which one may reckon, and so far as my experience goes, it is perhaps stronger in them than in any other race. If it were not for their religious hypocrisies, childish conventions, and above all, their incredible snobbishness, their love of fair play alone would make them the worthiest leaders of humanity. All this as if I had felt then as a boy as clearly as I see today. So, okay, to me, those are very contradictory. these Anglo-Saxon British, they're very fair. Also, they've committed the worst tragedies and horrible things in the last period. And here's one more, just to complicate it even more. No one word to my own people in a particular shortcomings. Anglo-Saxon domineering combativeness is the greatest danger to humanity in the world today. Okay, those are three very universalist, very broad statements. I had trouble wrapping it all together. What do you guys think about it?
I feel like maybe somewhere in there, it's kind of like some of the he's not clear about it, but some of the times he's talking about individuals and like smaller house people, the people are, but then he's kind of saying like the overall the values that the whole group, when they get together, like it's a lot of times, like some people are when they're just by themselves, like they do really good things and stuff, but you get them in a group of like a large society or somewhere where everyone kind of just follows the masses and it becomes something very different than who they really are as individuals. And so maybe
Well,
he's playing with that idea some, maybe not even meaning to, I don't know.
I didn't read that from that quote. He seemed very keen on Anglo-Saxon, British. He does bring up that idea though elsewhere. And I will bring that up in a second, but I don't know. Like he says, the worst crimes in the last 50 years, but also these are the fairest people in the world.
Right.
I don't know. Do you want to touch on that, Kevin or Julia?
Internal conflict.
Okay.
He has internal conflict about the people. That's it.
I guess, but I see what you're saying, although it's just strange then that he makes it such a generalized statement. You know what I'm saying? But in terms of what Jack said, I had this to be an interesting take, another hot take. I have two more of these and we'll move on. But he mentions, like, in terms of the centrifugal force and the group of people. Here's the quote on this, and I thought this was really interesting. And I think in a way, it could apply to America and to China, which have big populations. Here we go. Pressure from the outside is one factor, but not even the most important. The centripetal force in the society itself is often much more powerful. How else can one explain the fact that during the World War, of course, in this case, we're talking about World War One, liberty almost disappeared in these states, the USA, in spite of the First Amendment to the Constitution. At all times, indeed, there is much less regard for liberty here than in England or even in Germany or in France. One only has to think about prohibition to admit to this, which he was going through at the time, right? The pull towards the center in every country is in a direction proportioned to the mass and according to the herd feeling in America is unreasonably strong. So again, he's basically saying because America is so big that the things are being pulled to the middle because there's just so much going on, which I think has an interesting point. You know what I'm saying? I'm not surprised he doesn't like prohibition also. But anyway, what do you guys think about that? I think you can see it in China as well because China's so big. There's going to be a conservativeness to it to bring it back home to the center because you have so much to deal with. You know what I'm saying? And we saw our rights trampled recently.
Right. I like, yeah, I feel like one of just talking about like the American side of it. I think it's kind of interesting because like I feel like there's a lot of groupthink in America that is based on this like the rugged individualism or whatever, but it's not actually like it's just like groupthink about rugged individualism. Like it's not like it's not actual individualism. It's like yeah, we all believe the same thing. That's how we're different and independent and unique. It's like well, all right, well that's a hell of a way to think. Like
Yeah, we're all individuals. We're all individuals. There's an inherent contradiction when you start doing that. Like, the classic thing is punk. Like if
right.
we're all wearing mohawks, are we all?
Right. You gotta all have the leather jacket, like.
I get in trouble with that with my DJ sets because like I was a resident DJ at La Barone, this really kind of fancier place, and the local guys would love it because I would play local music at this fancy place and punk rock place, and they thought that was all cool. But what they didn't understand and would piss them off is that also meant that when I DJ'd at a punk show, I wanted to play Lady Gaga, which to me is the same thing. But to them, Chachi would get so pissed off about that shit. Fuck it.
Right.
But anyway, you see my point. To me, it's the exact same thing. You don't get it. Like that's the point. You're
Right.
supposed if I'm at the metal bar, I want to play non-metal music for the exact same reason that when I'm at a posh place that I want to play metal. It's not a one direction thing. Anyway,
You're a classic,
You want?
classic contrarian.
there's
Whatever
a
is the dominant paradigm, you have to be able to go outside it and become,
yeah.
the counterculture, right? So if the culture is counterculture, then to be counter the counterculture.
To a degree, I think that's 100% right. And I wouldn't.
There's
Is
still
it
a group for
contrary?
that.
What's that?
There's still a group for that.
Maybe. And to me, it's not even about necessarily being contrarian. It's about doing something interesting or different. Being expressive. But anyway, we don't have to talk about my shit.
Well,
Um,
I think Frank is somebody who is perhaps what you would call a classic liberal, that he wants liberation, and so he definitely will respond to conservative type of approaches and find them wanting.
mhm.
But it is kind of strange to me, at least, that when I was reading it, I kept finding him saying he mentioned certain philosophers, like he said, I fell in love with John Stuart Mill, or
Well, he doesn't like me.
at first
Yeah.
I found this professor who loved to talk about Hegel, and then I realized Hegel was totally full of shit. But he never really truly analyzes culture in a kind of a other than some surface observations about his personal preferences. So,
Yeah.
Like that quote you read, it is full of contradictions that you could theoretically write, an entire socio-political tract about. And, he doesn't analyze it in any kind of a way that provides deeper insights other than, and I happen to have some opinions about this and opinions about that.
And
And
in his defense, it's his book. It's his book, so he's allowed to just say things. He doesn't need to give the entire history of things. You know what I'm saying?
And I liked it because it kind of kept it breezy. And I
Yeah.
just kept thinking, yeah, I could see how he could have that point of view. It actually may be contradictory if you wanted to dig into it, but he doesn't care, or and maybe even if you do look at something like Hegel, something dialectic, you can hold one idea, you hold the opposite idea, they clash, they combine and create a third, then that'll clash with a new one.
Mhm.
I mean, so you could theoretically try to figure out, does he really have a consistent philosophy or not? And it's probably he does have a certain libertine values that seem almost to come first, and then you'll rationalize them later on. I mean, it's a little bit to me like the way he treats women, which is in some ways you could say, well, he respects them enough to let them be sexually liberated. I mean, he doesn't mind if they're sexually liberated. He doesn't treat them like a Puritan would go, "How dare you?" But he'll also love you and leave you. It's not like it's not like he's treating them with such respect that he says, "Well, if I take someone's virginity, then I'm gonna be faithful to them because honestly, that's something where I've changed their life forever." And no, he's just basically gonna love them and leave them. And so, he's got these contradictions that he allows himself, which makes him an interesting narrator, but he never gets too deep into it.
Yeah, and his obligation for it is to himself, and he even says that. And this is the final quote for the hot takes, and then I want to hear what Julia has to say with it. He says, he talks about being in the school when he tried to defend the lower group against the older group. In fact, I was half sent to Coventry, and what hurt me most was that it was the boys of the lower school who were coldest to me, the very boys for whom I had been fighting. That gave me a bitter foretaste of what was to happen to me again and again and again throughout all my life. He basically is saying when he tried to speak for other people or put anything above himself, he got bucked. He also says, very soon the first command of it came to my lips almost every hour. Blame your own blindness. Always blame yourself. He was going to put it on himself, not others for things. Julie, what were you saying?
Just saying he was probably just writing what he felt at that moment because like I do that all the time. If you've ever read anything I've written, it is pure insanity because I am thinking several things at once and I am writing
Hmm.
them all down.
Yeah.
So
It's right. It's
there
like a way to
there
work
doesn't
through it.
have to be a rhyme and reason for why he thinks this philosophy for this time and this one. It's just like, oh, this is what popped in my head, write it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
And
how long? Do you know how long this book took, like, for him to write, or is it like, is this over like a, like, that'd be interesting to know, like, because like you're saying, maybe it was like years and years of him kind of working on this thing, and like his like way that he viewed things changed a bit, and he kind of, and we have a sense of like when we look back at our own history or the history of the world, like we shade it in certain directions based on how we feel at the moment, and like people tend to change history, in their heads, and what really happened changes, and if he had a 5 year span of writing this book, maybe he just kind of changed his mind and wanted to aim it a little bit differently at some point.
well, we know it was published in volumes, but that doesn't
Right.
mean that we doesn't say when it was written. How long he could have written the whole thing and it just got published in volumes, or he could have written a chunk and
Yeah.
as it goes. It's hard to say. I don't have that information here. It's like when you read Jack Kerouac, where he talks about the same couple incidents over and over and over in his books, but
Right.
you're getting the perspective of what he thinks he was thinking at the time and the perspective of what he was when he was writing it about that time as well. And those things are always changing. So you're reading the same incidents, but it's different emotions, different emphasis based on those circumstances. Um, Cold takes. Number four. We're running through these, and the last couple are shorter anyway. Ice cold takes. Ideas, arguments, assertions from the author that you may disagree with or that seem wonky. Okay, so some of these I didn't get at all. Uh, um, Page 26. Thus, the first experiences of passion and the reading of a love story completely cured me of the bad habit of self abuse. So he had his first sexual experiences and he read love stories and then he started jacking off less. I don't get that at all. You know what I'm saying?
Wasn't into romance?
He basically says he was masturbating a lot and then he read love stories and he stopped masturbating as much. And I was like, no, that's not how it works for everyone. Isn't it the opposite?
No.
Maybe it's like, right, like
Like
he wants the real thing now. He doesn't want to just be jacking off in his room. Like that's not good enough anymore. Like that he needs the real deal and that's it. Like that's kind of maybe what he means.
That's why
I'm
when
pretty
Jack
sure
lost
you're
his
still going
virginity,
to
he
be
stopped
doing
having
it.
masturbating, right, Jack? Right?
Yeah,
Exactly, right?
right.
Exactly.
Like yeah. I don't wonder if he knows you could do both. Is that like
Whoa. Whoa.
I don't get that. Like
it's a
it
It's
tends
like
to be
0-1. He's like, shit, zero, I guess. All right, I'll go with
Maybe
that.
maybe the romance just like turned him off completely and was all like, "Oh man, I don't want to ever experience that. That sounds
Right.
horrible."
I
Right.
to me it's a
Yeah,
boulder. It's a rolling stone.
right. Because it does.
it only built.
Yeah, because like when he's like with the whole like the one of his first, I think it might be his very first experience with the girl at the organ or whatever, and like and he doesn't like have sex with her, but he like touches her, whatever. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but that was like a big thing. And he was like, "This is amazing, this is amazing." And like within seconds, by the time he was done, he was like, he just hated it and was like angry at her and was like, oh, I can't believe you, like, and all this stuff. And so it was like it was not a happy experience, even though the whole time he's telling it, it's like the greatest thing in his life. But the second it's over, he's like, oh, I hate this. Like, this is no good.
First sexual experiences
Even
can
to
be
his
confusing.
animal instincts, and he didn't like it.
Right.
It's confusing a bit. Page 34. When you can put a stiff penis in her hand and weep profusely the while, you're getting near any woman's heart. But don't forget the
Right.
tears.
Lube.
I can't imagine girls really liking just having a hard on and tears at the same time being like the ultimate aphrodisiac. But I don't know.
Bad boys are pretty hot.
Right.
Crying with a hard on?
I feel like it's like, right. I feel like that's kind of meant like metaphorically, or it's not like literal. It's kind of like, it's like showing like you have a heart and you really care, but also you're kind of this, maybe it's back to the idea of like femininity and masculinity. So, like you have both sides, and that's what really women want, is like both sides,
Are you married, Jack? Do you have a girlfriend? I forget.
I have a girlfriend, but no, I'm not married. Not
Yeah,
anymore.
why don't you get a hard on, start crying, and see how? Tell me how that goes. Okay. Maybe it'll get you closer. You can blame Frank Harris. Hey, baby, I want to try something.
Fucking Frank Harris ruined my life.
Yeah. Page 42. This was a term that okay. Page 42. That night I tied up Tommy and gave myself up to thoughts of Lucille's private parts. Is Tommy the name of his dick?
I think so.
What's that?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think like, well, there's the other boy Tommy there is a Tommy in it. But did he actually tie up Tommy, or is Tommy the name of his dick?
That's
I don't know.
That's the
He
part
does
where he's
tie
talking about
himself
tying the
up,
string.
right? Yeah, he gets the string, and this is how and then he tries to do it for his friend at one point too.
Is that what it was, that he tied up Tommy's dick? Yeah. I I don't know. Maybe that's what makes sense. That he tied up his friend's dick to do the hard on.
Right.
Anyway, I'm moving on. Anyway, I don't even care.
That's what makes the most sense. Yeah.
Here's back to an American thing. There's only two more quotes, and then we're on the downhill. Here's more about America. 5 years later, I was to see Walt Whitman. But actually, let me cut off. When I think of Walt Whitman and sexuality, this is what I think of. He wrote some randy poetry. I like a lot of Walt Whitman stuff, but I don't think of that necessarily. I read, when I was in Mongolia, I read this really long book. It was just a collection of interviews that Allen Ginsberg did over his life. Allen Ginsberg, the poet, right? And Allen Ginsberg, one of the most repeated things in Allen Ginsberg's book, interviews that he repeated over and over throughout his life, was he loved to recount that he could make a fuck chain from Walt Whitman to himself. Now, Allen Ginsberg never had sex with Walt Whitman, but Walt Whitman near the end of his life, had sex with a younger guy, who had sex with another guy, had sex with another guy, and he could connect himself sexually to Walt Whitman, and he took immense pride. And I just wanted to bring that up. That's what I think about with Walt Whitman and sexuality. Is Allen Ginsberg's fuck chain back to Walt Whitman, who's a big influence on him. Singing the Body Electric. Anyway, 5 years later, I was to see Walt Whitman, the noblest of all Americans, living in utter poverty at Campton, dependent upon English admirers for a change of clothes or a sufficiency of food. And Poe had suffered in the same way. Just dropping names. Bit by bit, the conviction was forced in me upon that if the American democracy does much to level up the lowest class, it is still more successful in leveling down the highest and best. No land on earth is so friendly to the poor illiterate toilers, no land so contemptuous cold to thinkers and artists, the guides of humanity. What hope is there here for men of letters and artists, for the seers and prophets? Such guides are not wanted by the idle rich and are ignored by the masses, and after all, the welfare of the head is more important even than that of the body and feet. What will become of those who stone the prophet and persecute the teachers? The doom is written in flaming letters on every page of history. Really well written. I don't know if I agree with him, though. What do you guys think of that?
I think he just thinks of himself as one of those prophets.
Nailed it. I was about to say the same thing. I think he thinks he should be a lot more rich and prominent, and he wasn't because America doesn't respect those people. Nailed it. I don't know. I mean, America does put these people on pedestals. Walt Whitman was a controversial figure, and he gave up, he was also someone who gave up a lot of money opportunities to, volunteer during the Civil War and stuff. So, not the Civil War.
Yeah, it was the Civil War.
Yeah, Civil War. That's right. It wasn't Civil War. I thought I was thinking French, but no. Yeah. So I don't know. I think America does put. When I think of America, I think America putting a more limited few on a bigger pedestal because it's easier to market than missing out on a lot of just really good, strong local talent in a way. But maybe that's just me. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts with that? I don't know. Okay, fine. We're moving on. One last one. The idea of this, his sort of cavalier attitude towards Mexicans was kind of rough. The idea of punishing the Mexicans for getting shot trying to recapture their own cattle appealed to us Americans as something intensely humorous. I'm going to read that sentence again. The idea of punishing the Mexicans for getting shot trying to recapture their own cattle appealed to us Americans as something intensely humorous. All the Texans gave their names solemnly as witnesses, and Rossiter swore he would draw up the document. Years afterwards, Ben, whom I met by chance, told me that Rossiter had gotten $40,000 on that claim. Just really horrible shit there, right?
Right.
Yeah. I guess
I
it's
don't know.
the
I agree. I
spirit.
think it's pretty funny. I mean, they fucked those guys up one side and down the other, and then they walked away with a lawsuit that made them more money about it. I mean, I
mean,
wouldn't.
that sounds like the United States.
Yeah, I wouldn't condone it. I don't condone it, but I can see how it would go. we worked that one.
I guess, but it's just so cavalier and horrible. I've been watching Democracy Now! Recently, and it was talking about how when France gave up Haiti as being a colony, it charged them for their lost money, which includes slaves. So Haiti had to pay back France for France's lost moneyed value, which included the people in Haiti who had just been freed from slavery. So it's like,
This is what
anyway.
makes me constantly
Again,
realize that
sounds about right.
Yeah, Frank Harris seems a classically entitled Chad type of guy, where he's all like, I take what I want, I get what I want. If I, for example, if a girl says, "Hey, now that we fucked a couple times, you're gonna marry me, right?" and he's all like, "That's when I started to lose feelings for her."
Right.
Every time
He didn't want to be tied down.
He waltzes through the world expecting to get rich. If other
He
people
works
get
hard
rich,
though.
that's really
Works hard.
damn shame.
I believe him. When people get around that much and stuff, especially in those days, I will point out since we're all four of us Americans here, right? So when I hear stuff about immigration in America and how legal immigration and shit, he was a teenager. He got onto the boat, said sayonara to fucking England, got here, started working immediately. The idea that, oh yeah, every immigrant is going to wait and respect laws. He didn't give a fuck, Frank.
Right.
He just got over, And the rich guy wanted to adopt him. He's like, fuck you, old man. I'm going my own path and shit,
Right.
All right. Category number 5 is Google alerts items in the book that prompted further research. The term fag, which is a lot in the English school, right? He wrote in the book, the fags, too, being young and weak, were often brutally treated just for fun. This is what Wikipedia says. The term fag or fagging has been widely used for practice of younger pupils acting as personal servants to the most senior boys for well over 100 years in England in the public school system of education. So, and it's sometimes considered one of the sources of the derogatory term faggot, right?
Well,
all
because
right.
at some point the teacher says that, don't they? It's not just the boys, right? Like I feel like one of the like doctors or headmasters or something also uses that term.
Yeah.
It just seems
yeah,
like another term for freshmen.
Right.
Anyways.
That's a good point. Okay. It's time for now the best and the most important part of the Going Through Pages Rock and Roll Book Club. It's category 6, which is adapt or die. How you like the material reinterpreted, for example, actors in the movie version or having a different author of the same material. So I'm going to try something here. It's probably going to fail. So just to explain this, Jack. So if this was a book, if you could have this same material so far written from a different author, or if there's a film version, who would direct it? You see what I'm saying with it? That's the idea behind this category here. And I had something that I wanted to share for this, which I can't find. But I will find in a moment. Kevin, do you have anything you wanted to mention for this?
I don't know. Maybe it would make a good rap album.
What?
I could
What?
see that.
Can you explain that, please?
Oh well, I mean, now this may seem a little sensitive to say, but a lot of rap, albums are about hey, this is how I treat my bitches and hoes. So possibly that type of entitled male bravado would work really well as a as I don't know. I could hear Jay-Z, talking about this is how I got rich. This is who I stole from. This is how I made some money slinging some crack on the street and whatever it is. It's classic rags to riches story and rags to bitches story, I guess maybe.
Okay. Julie, do you have anything you want to say, or you want me to get to my thing first?
No, just
Okay.
yeah.
We're gonna get to you, Jack, too. Keep thinking, Jack. But there was the beginning of this book in the preface reminded me, this is not exactly the category, but it's related. I feel like part of this book was kind of adapted for something else. Okay. I feel like this book was an influence on something that I recognize quickly, and I have the material that I think copied this book. And then I'll tell you mine. And I want to show it to you. Actually, I'll read the passage that reminded me of it. This is the beginning of the passage, right? I was born on the 14th of February, 1855, and named James Thomas, after my father's 2 brothers. My father was in the Navy, lieutenant in command of a revenue cutter or gunboat, and we children saw him only at long intervals. My earliest recollection is being danced on the foot of my father's brother James, the captain of an Indiaman, who paid us a visit in the south of Kerry when I was about 2. I distinctly remember repeating a hymn by heart for him, my mother on the other side of the fireplace prompting. Then I got him to dance me a little more, which was all I wanted. Okay. It goes on from there. That reminded me of something else, which I want to show you guys right now.
Oh, no, please, please. Let's hear about your childhood.
Okay.
Very well. Where do I begin? My father was a relentlessly self-improving boulangerie owner from Belgium with low-grade narcolepsy and a penchant for buggery. My mother was a 15-year-old French prostitute named Chloe with webbed feet. My father would womanize, he would drink, he would make outrageous claims like he invented the question mark. Sometimes he would accuse chestnuts of being lazy, the sort of general malaise that only the genius possess and the insane lament. My childhood was typical. Summers in Rangoon, luge lessons. In the spring, we'd make meat helmets. When I was insolent, I was placed in a burlap bag and beaten with reeds. Pretty standard, really. At the age of 12, I received my first scribe. At the age of 14, as a roastery named Vilma, ritualistically shaved my testicles. There really is nothing like a shorn scrotum. It's breathtaking. I suggest you try it.
You know, we have to stop.
I feel like the tone and the style of my childhood was typical, like sort of thing. The Indian man and reading hymns. It to me, I felt they were really connected. Do you guys get that era bit at all? I
Yeah,
don't know.
I see it. I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get it.
Anyway, my adaptation is I think this would be a great audio book written by like a randy Irish actor. I want to have an audiobook version of this done by Colin Farrell, or if it was like 40 years ago, Richard Harris or Peter O'Toole. I think would do an awesome audiobook version of this. But Colin Farrell nowadays would be good. I feel like he could play the character well. That's my adapt or die. Jack, do you have any? Do you have a film version or some author you'd like to do this at all or anything
Well,
like that?
no, the only thing that I got thinking about, I was like, it would be really interesting if we had Vernon as his story about his Frank Harris, like his brother, like because especially like once he like disappears and everything, and like where what the hell happened, and like and because also I wonder like where Frank says like like my brother and his buddies said I was so amazing all the time. Like, what does Vernon really think if he says that at all? Like, what is he really thinking? Is he fucking with them? Like is he like like was he like does Frank Harris not know sarcasm or is it like like? But I'd be interested to see Vernon's take and also Vernon having like the experience with his father, so you could kind of compare the reality that Frank tells versus like Vernon, who could tell some of the same stories, but in probably a very different way.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Yeah, and at the end of chapter 8, it's his brother Vernon who shows up. It says, "Come work with me," right?
Oh yeah, that's right,
Out of nowhere. Yes.
Yeah,
right.
which is still just an amazing. It's just an amazing. I mean, this is pre. Of course, it's pre-internet. It's pre-telephone. Basically, I mean, there was only things like the idea of like, yeah, I'll find you in America. Like, get the fuck out of here! Like,
Right. Oh yeah, Kansas City. That's where. Yeah.
yeah. Like, if I play a fucking cell phone with WeChat, I can't find people and shit. So
Right.
anyway, that's category 6. And category 7, there are some antiquated and weird things with the file, but I still question this. Category 7 is motherfucking wrong, bad facts, and whack grammar. When he says, I could learn good poetry by a single careful reading, bad poetry or prose was much harder. Do we really believe him?
Like, I feel like if that was a thing that happened to him, he would at least give some explanation. Like he would be like, "Oh, I have this like thing, or I do like something." Like I feel like there would just be more rather than just constantly repeating like, "I did it. It's amazing." Like he doesn't really. I don't know. I feel like it's just not. I don't. It's not fleshed out enough for me. I just don't believe it. I know
It
some
was
people can do shit like that, but
It,
it was just
especially when he
another
just said
nose
to
in
read
the
it
air
once.
moment.
Yeah. Because there are people who like memorize like the entire Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. But I don't think they can do it in one night.
Right. Where he's like, oh yeah, they said yesterday my teacher said that nobody could possibly memorize Paradise Lost in a day. And I was like, what? That you can't do that? Check this out. Like, you know,
Like that's
like, and then
preposterous.
does it. And he's like, oh, also, I'm going to go high jump higher than everybody, and I'm going to run way faster than everybody, because also I'm better at that than everybody. So, like, I feel like it is some of it, what he's saying is still, like, to me, like a 4 or 5 year old's mentality of, like, I'm the fastest runner. Like, you ever see me on a bicycle? Look how fast I can go. Like, and I feel like it's like a bit childish in a way. Like, he never quite developed a maturity about some of those things. Like,
Maybe. Well, they always say that Michael Jordan was the same thing. Like, if he lost one game of ping pong, he was going to practice ping pong until he could beat the motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? He's going to buy, you know. So who knows? Yeah, I don't necessarily buy it. But, you know, it's an interesting thing. But, yeah, that's it. We read the first half. And I guess in 2 weeks, we can talk about the second half.
nice.
And I put out what the next book is going to be, which is going to be Ginger Baker's acclaimed autobiography, The World's Greatest Drummer. And I'm tying that to a critical music club where we're going to have a member of his band, African Force, join us to talk about an album they did together. I don't think anyone else is going to join this book, especially because of what it is. And it's not exactly the most famous thing. It's the second half. But you could encourage people to join for the Ginger Baker one.
Yeah.
That'd be cool.